Get. All right. So yeah. So as I was saying, James Vonish, Riverfield Studies Network. Just a few things about the Riverfield Studies Network, who's hosting the webinar today. The Riverfield Studies Network is a community of practice. It's a bunch of instructors, probably mostly college professors or aspiring college professors or retiring college professors, mostly dealing with that age of student. We all feel passionately about rivers and field education on rivers. And so there are lots of challenges to getting students out in the field. Uh, there are lots of challenges to dealing with students in riverine environments. And yet we also feel like that's where the magic can happen sometimes. But also bad things can happen. So how do we learn together to safely provide transformative experiences that help kind of like inspire that next generation of river scholars and stewards? And so we're a community of practice that supports each other in that sort of broad mission. And I'd say that a couple of announcements related to our sort of primary activities. We do these webinars, and this is one of the ways that we engage with folks very broadly. But then we have this kind of high effort, high investment, I guess, kind of focal program, maybe is a better way to talk about it, the River Scholars program. And if you're in the River Scholars program right now and you've got your screen on, you can raise your hand. There are a few there. I see John, alumni, lots of alumni here. So these are all folks who have participated in almost year-long-ish or 8-month long. It starts with some onboarding in the spring. There's a kind of flagship rendezvous where we get everybody together. We focus on sort of outdoor skills development and learning from outdoor experiential education. We talk about pedagogy in the field. We demonstrate lessons. We learn how to do lessons. We ideate around like creating our own lessons. And everybody leaves the workshop with a lesson idea that they're planning to work on. And then they create that lesson and they share it with all of us. And if you go to our Cubes Hub, I think we're getting close to 30 lessons, which how many times have they downloaded, Andy? When you get 29,000, 30,000? Lots.
20,000.
Yeah, lots. So people are out there and downloading these resources that you have created for each other. I just saw an email from Anna Marshall, who's one of our alumni, who said she's piloting a new river course, and there's several of those lessons that are in it. So it's like trying to reduce the barrier to entry. Like if you're thinking about starting a river course and you're like, I have to do it all. Well, you don't have to do it all because you can lean on us and the other lessons that your colleagues have created. So the cohort right now is in the middle of, they've come up with their lessons, they've drafted them, and now they're piloting them. I just like looked through, almost all of them have finished piloting. So they test them out on their home audience. And then they get feedback from their peers and from the leadership team and from the students. They do it with the students they tested out on. They also do some feedback. They revise those lessons, and those lessons all get shared. And then they'll post those on our website. And then they'll also present them in a meeting in January, just like this one, where you all can come and hear what they did. And so we kind of are midstream in that, but we also have, we're starting to get ready to recruit for the next year. So the application for the 2026 cohort of scholars will probably be circulated in late November, early December. And you'll have until the end of January to get your application in, and then you'll be selected within the next month. And then the rendezvous next year is going to be in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. I don't see if Liz is here, but Liz Wiring, who is one of our alumni from the James River cohort, will be hosting us there on the Illinois River. And then this will be our last official scholar training. The life cycle of the grant's about to wrap. We do hope to do maybe one kind of like tie a bow on it, reflect on what did it all mean kind of thing the following year. But we are kind of coming to a close. So if you're, get off the fence. This is your last chance to jump in. And announcements. Oh, the other thing I was going to announce is like we started this last summer, a river field safety workshop specifically. And so that doesn't do as much with the pedagogy per se. It's a little bit more focused on like, you get a swiftwater safety credential, you get a wilderness first aid credential. We do a workshop on preventing harassment in the field. So it's just kind of like safety, risk management, harassment management kind of intensive. And that's a week-long thing. We're planning to host that again in the summer as well, which is kind of Yeah, anybody. That's open to anybody. If you're in the scholar program or not, and we have a little more capacity for that, but you have to get here. It'd probably be in Richmond again on the James, but we might have another option as well. We're exploring that. So keep an eye out for those opportunities. But today I'm really excited to host two, superstars in Riverfield education. They both presented at the International Society for River Science meetings. Andy here, Andy Roast, who's with us, helped organize for the network a special session. And then there was also another special session, two special sessions on Riverfield education. And in fact, Kira, who's one of our speakers today, is hosting another special session on Riverfield education at AGU in New Orleans coming up pretty soon. So lots of great opportunities for people to come together around Riverfield education. But since not everybody could be at the meetings, we wanted to ask some of the people to come and share here so that we could engage that, they could share more broadly with the network. We're going to record it, and so also people can access it that way. And these are a great pair because, as you'll see, they're very distinct, but they're also related. And so, it's kind of showcasing some really great work that's done by a group of collaborators. Josh Veers is centrally involved in this, but lots of great folks, and I'm excited to have them come and share their work with you today. So first up, we have Jack Severson, who's going to talk to us about place-based paddling, experiential learning for a secure water future. So Jack, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks for the intro, James. Good to see all folks here. Bear with me while I get the screen share going. Cool. Awesome. Well, yeah, my name's Jack Severson. I'm currently employed at UC Merced. As Josh or James mentioned, I work really closely with Dr. Joshua Veers and affiliates at Secure Water Future. And so this presentation is kind of a more broad look at how we've designed some of these experiential learning field courses that are, as I say, kind of river-centric, but also providing a really broad range of learning opportunities, whether that is from site visits, from peer-to-peer learning, mentor to peer, all of it. So I'll jump right in. So it's no secret that, in contemporary times, we're dealing with incredible water stresses, really tricky situations on how to equitably divide up this water, how to find just uses for it. And this is nothing new to, I assume, much of the folks in this call. And I think a part of the issue that's happening here is people are becoming less and less connected to their waterways. So there's, a lot of different methods or, approaches to reconnecting people with rivers. And here I'm going to kind of focus on academia's role. So academia, I think, is often known for maybe like documenting the story of rivers, talking about the sciences embedded in the processes that happen, some of the obstacles we face, and maybe some of the solutions. But I think that it's not talked about as often as it should be. But academia really serves as like a convener. And so it brings together, stakeholders, researchers, students, community members, all these people to the same table where they can kind of discuss and learn and in a very collective way, inspire people to reconnect with rivers a lot more closely. So with this, the secure water future, I'm going to blow through this slide really quickly. So with this, the project I work on, the Secure Water Future project, is funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. So Secure Water Future, or SWIFT, is a collaborative of investigators aiming to improve agricultural and environmental water resilience across the semi-arid Western U.S. So the whole team is comprised of researchers, extension specialists, and educators working across California, New Mexico, and Utah. And the whole project has applicability to the Western U.S. and beyond. So the Secure Water Future team has built upon previous iterations of field-based learning programs that a lot of it stems from the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis, and a lot of different folks to give credit to there. But the Secure Water Futures program we have titled the Climate Adaptation Science Academy Experiential Learning Expedition, or CASA LA for short. So this field-based experiential learning program was really focused on preparing the next generation of leaders to meet the demands of our contemporary water challenges. And so we do this by engaging in discussions, and these discussions happen a lot on the forefront, and that's done through Zoom. And then we take all these discussions and getting to know each other, and we bring them into the field for like a week long or a 10-day expedition where we're meeting with different stakeholder groups. The students are getting to know each other and talking. And it's a really powerful trip and program, and it really sharpens a lot of the skills that I think are necessary in working in the water world, just by the very complex nature of it. So students work on sharpening their collaborative skills. They build a systems level understanding that's really essential for effective water leadership. Lovely. So my origins is probably similar to some folks on this call, but I'm the guy in the blue shirt and the black helmet. I started myself as a raft guide, and I've worked in California for the last 8 summers. I had the really awesome opportunity to take Dr. Joshua Veers, Dr. Sarah Knoll, and a whole host of other folks on a 3-day rafting trip on the Tuolumne. And that was kind of my first introduction into the world of water, right? And so I got to know these folks, and one thing led to another, and that led me to a job interview that I didn't know was a job interview at UC Merced. And nowadays I work there, and a big part of my role is kind of planning and facilitating these experiential learning expeditions. And so a lot of the skills that I've learned through raft guiding, I think, are very applicable to these experiential learning expeditions. It's a balance of so many different things, of logistics and making sure that people are feeling seen and taken care of, and also introducing this academic agenda into everything. It's a real interesting balancing act. But each parts of those, I think, are really critical to the success of the program. Secure Water Future has hosted 4 of these CASA LA programs. The first one being on the Tuolumne River in 2022. Our second iteration happened in 2023 on the Green River in Utah. 2024, we headed to New Mexico and rafted the Rio Chama. And this last year's, after exploring each of the Secure Water Futures study zones, we expanded a little bit and tried to look at Western water as a whole, and that was by checking out the Yampa River, one of the last free-flowing large tributaries to the Colorado River, which seemed like a very important place to go and bring up some of these questions and do a little bit of digging on. So, as I was saying, the Colorado River Basin is one of the most water-stressed regions in the world. Prolonged drought, declining snowpack, groundwater depletion, and entrenched legal frameworks threaten water and food security for more than 40 million people. In the U.S., 30 federally recognized tribes and northern Mexico. So this really did make for an ideal setting where the students could really kind of put their hands in the dirt, and proverbially, and really get a sense of the whole systems approach. And so for this, I'm going to kind of focus on CASA LA as a case study for the rest of this presentation. But all of the things that we're talking about here are applied to all of the CASA LA programs and the other things that we do. So Our formula and vision, largely as we designed these programs, came down to four things. We did a little bit of talking beforehand, afterhand, all of it, and we came up with four kind of key markers. The first one was dedicated time to orient as a team. So this was done before we even met in person. This was done through a lot of Zoom meetings. There were scheduled times to meet and chat, and then there were kind of some more unstructured coffee talk Zoom meetings where students could get to know each other a little bit. Next piece would be immersive place-based site visits. This really helps to kind of paint the picture of the watershed and a lot of the different factors going into water management. Three was what we call circular mentorship, where students were learning from specialists in the field. They would learn from one another, and then they would go on to kind of teach each other, whether they be mentors or mentees, about their subject matter. And then finally, four is equitable funding structures. All of this can't happen without some sort of funding, and stable funding, enough funding to support these students kind of worry-free on these programs is really critical. So I'm going to get into each of these a little bit more. Okay, so first, orienting as a team. So when we went about this, we really designed this cohort really intentionally. And so we selected students kind of within the Secure Water Future Network and adjacent. And we were really looking for students that had a focus in water, but maybe different specializations. So we had students with, expertise or experience in hydrogeology, journalism, geography, water policy, civil engineering, a whole mix, which really contributed to the discussion and the relations on the cohort. So this diversity of all these different fields really encouraged one another to kind of gain a working fluency in each other's fields, and maybe not to be experts, but just enough to know and kind of hold conversations with one another. And so that was kind of happening before the trip and during the trip. Everybody was really eager to teach and learn from one another, and it really helped to kind of create this common literacy across all the fields. All right, so next, we really, ahead of the trip and on the trip, we wanted to really emphasize trust and kind of a shared language of respect, openness, and care. So purposeful engagement through structured activities and informal conversations, all of this kind of helps humanize everybody, put everybody on the same playing field, and that was really just a great base to build off of. And it wasn't that we were building that base and one person was succeeding, everybody was growing and learning at kind of a similar rate. And so how we did this is the group organizers is we had group meetings on Zoom where we'd all get together. We also had like one-on-one Zoom meetings where we would talk to the students. We could hear any of the worries they had. Maybe it was some stress about camping for the first time or worries about meeting requirements for school deadlines, things like that. And so it was just a time to like person to person talk to people, see how they're feeling, and then kind of like address any of the worries they had. And I think that was really important. Going into the trip. Everybody felt, to my knowledge, fairly taken care of. All right, so lastly, for the days spent in the field, we designed our daily structures around like our site visits and meeting with different speakers and hosts. But we also built in some like structured time to discuss, to reflect on the day, to talk about ideas, things that we learned about, and also, there was some informal time where students and mentors could kind of just chat and either chat not about academic stuff or they could, and they all learned about it a lot the whole way through. Great. So next thing I'm going to talk about here is our site visits. And so the site visits are like a really essential component to these experiential learning expeditions. So while we were visiting, or while we were on the CASA LA expedition, we went to 7 different sites. This included Colorado State University agricultural research stations. We went to the Shoshone Power Plant, a couple different farms in Western Colorado. We visited Flaming Gorge Dam, the Colorado River Conservation District, and Ute Tribal Water Rights Department offices. So we spanned a lot of different focus points here, all of these kind of vetted stakeholders in the Colorado River Basin. And so these site visits really got students out of the classroom, got them in person, and grounded a lot of these kind of abstract theories that we read about and discuss about, and we could ground them in lived realities. And so this grounding, I think, is especially important in the Colorado River Basin, where industries, politics, communities, and ecosystems all converge under an outdated legal framework and mounting climate pressures. So it's very pertinent to go get this hands-on knowledge. And so by interacting with all these different site visit hosts, local communities, students really were able to like reflect on their own understanding of the Colorado River Basin and maybe adjust some of their perspectives to better fit the realities of it. And so I also wanted to note that a really equally important part of these site visits was experiencing them together and experiencing together with all these different voices, all these different specializations in water. And, people would ask different questions, ones somebody wouldn't even think of. And it really helped to grow this like collective understanding. All right. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about mentorship. So the mentorship on the trip was really critical. And I think it's really critical to these experiential learning expeditions because it gives people somewhat of a direction or a picture of like how they might continue in their careers. And so while we did all of our site visits on the CASA LA trip, and then a big part, or I might even call it the highlight of the trip, is going on a multi-day whitewater rafting trip. So after we did all the site visits, we all got together and we spent 4 days on the Yampa River. And so our student cohort helped to welcome 6 kind of mid to senior level professionals in various backgrounds and welcomed them on the trip and really just kind of had a fairly level playing field to interact with one another, to learn from one another. Oh, well, we're missing vertical mentorship, but I'm just going to talk to you about the forms of mentorship that we experienced on the trip. So I think for most of these experiential expeditions, there's this form of vertical mentorship where there is like a senior or an expert person in a certain subject, and they are imparting that knowledge onto someone newer into their career. While this is effective, it doesn't really necessarily touch on all the ways that people can learn. So you'll see here in the middle, there's horizontal mentorship, and that's kind of this peer-to-peer learning, which I've talked about, but was very impactful on this trip. Students that have a background in, drone use in agricultural settings, discussing with water rights specialists, stuff like that. Just a lot of interesting conversations came from this peer-to-peer learning. And then maybe the one of our biggest discoveries on this trip was the aspect of circular mentorship. So we describe or define circular mentorship as encompassing many forms of mentorship. So that is the vertical, the horizontal, but also this rotating leadership where different people kind of have the spotlight on them at different times, and they're in a position where they can shine, they can share their expertise and impart a lot of that knowledge on the group. And I don't quite have the figure here, but we expanded upon this circular mentorship that's rather internal, and it makes for a good venue being on the river because you can't really leave each other. You just all learn from each other internally. But after this trip, all this circular mentorship then goes outwards. It kind of expands or radiates, and all the things that these students learned on the trip go off to teach other folks. Oh, there it is. All right. So I scream, you scream, we all scream for stable funding. I know it. So this was another kind of baseline thing to make these programs possible is equitable and stable funding streams. So supporting these really diverse student cohorts, bringing students from different universities, different stages of study, is not something you can do with a small purse, let's say. But bringing all these students together is, maybe one of the most important parts of the trip. And so, how do we all get them there? It's this stable funding, and um, it's important to bring a lot of these students together from all these diverse backgrounds because it contributes a lot to the discussion. But if these students are expected to shoulder the costs of the program of feeding themselves for a week, going rafting, lodging, that's a lot. And I think it would turn off a lot of students from even applying. So having the ability to support all of these students with lodging, food, transportation throughout the expedition was really, really huge. And it let all these students just focus on learning, focus on these lived experiences, getting to know one another, and enjoying the time in the Colorado River Basin. So how to do this? My only experience with this is working with a large USDA Sustainable Agriculture System grant, but there's other ways to do it. There's maybe piecemealing funding from different sources together to kind of like scrap together enough funds to put on one of these programs, which is totally doable. But to make these experiential learning programs a little bit more stable in an academic setting or offered as a course year and year again, that depends on some significant and stable funding. I've said it a million times. Oh. Okay, so concluding all these thoughts, I went through the 4 key things that we felt made this expedition especially powerful. And so that was orienting as a team, taking the time to do that, uh, specific site-based site visits or place-based site visits, circular mentorship, and stable funding. So those were the 4 kind of key building blocks that we felt were the most important to all this. So meeting the challenge of 19th century water law, 20th century operating agreements, and 21st century water scarcity, it's going to require reimagining how we prepare this next generation of leaders. So rather than, doing the status quo and reinforcing these existing divides, we really need to make sure that we're training this next generation of students with a systems-oriented thinking, bridging disciplines, priorities, and perspectives. So we argue that these experiential learning expeditions are one of the most promising pathways to build this overarching capacity to operate in the water world. And we think it's just a really, really useful tool for training these new leaders and, preparing to meet the needs of 21st century water issues. Also wanted to make a quick note. So part of this program's requirements were for the students to collaboratively work on a paper. So this is the title of said paper. We're still working on it, but keep a lookout for it in the Journal of the American Water Resources Association. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Jack. And it's AI proof too, right?
Exactly. Okay.
So wonderful. Thanks, Jack. We are going to, I meant to say this at the beginning. We're going to go through the two talks, and then we'll kind of do Jack and Kira as like a Q&A panel at the end. So we're going to flow right into Kira Waldman's talk. She's going to speak to us today, All Forward Watershed Education on the Tuolumne, a decade after the Rim Fire.
Awesome. Can you see my
You're all
screen
good.
here?
You're all
Cool.
good.
Sweet. Thanks, Jack. Thanks, James. Just a delight to be talking to you all on a Friday afternoon. I will say I started grad school maybe 5 years ago, and Sarah Yarnell, who's somewhere on this call, whispered to me about the Riverfield Studies Network, and I've sort of always admired you all from a distance, and really stoked to be plugging into the work and being able to share my work and love of Riverfield science and river education. Like James said, my name is Kira Waldman. I'm a fifth-year graduate student at UC Davis, hoping to finish this year. Definitely gonna finish this year. And I've had, some wonderful opportunities and access to Riverfield Studies, not the network specifically, but just Riverfield Studies in California and in my time at Davis. Lots of which have been with Jack, so we're sort of a tandem boat, as you might say, and really appreciative of him for sort of setting the stage of like how we do these trips. And then I'm kind of going to dive in to give one, I would say, case study or example of a trip that I got to be one of the leaders on over the past couple of years. So I'll try and stick this to 15 minutes and really do welcome conversation and questions at the end, because it's so cool being in a network of people that know more about the topic than you do presenting it. So really excited. Anyways, title of my talk is All Forward Watershed Education on the Tuolumne River, a decade after the Rim Fire, and I'll sort of step through those three pieces. The first thing I want to highlight, if you are not a river person, is that All Forward is a common rafting command that, a guide tells the whole boat to get their paddles in the water and steer through or paddle as hard as you can through the rapid. And I sort of use it as a metaphor in my mind in terms of bringing collective people together, getting us through tough times, getting us through rapids, potentially getting us through situating ourselves in places of climate disturbance and climate grief. So kind of all together, we'll coalesce around this idea of all forward. Let's see if I can move things around. Oh yeah, this photo I think sort of sets the entire outline of my talk today. There's many different pieces that I'll be showing and highlighting. The first is the Rim Fire, which was a big devastating fire here in California, and you can see some of the burn scars from it up on the left bank over here. The second is the importance of paddling or the importance of rafting in this trip, and the overall just how California water and specifically the Tuolumne River sort of situated in a greater context in California. So really the question grounding my teaching and research is, how do we train scientists, stewards, and just people to really live in these damaged and dynamic systems? And then creating them, not only live in them, but learn from them, and creating sort of these living laboratories. So my guiding question is, as wildfires, drought, and infrastructure reshape our watersheds, how do we prepare future leaders? And this is something I take personally and professionally. As you know, I teach an intro to water science class at Davis, and I try and really infuse this pedagogy into my own work, and then personally because I like to raft. So considering myself potentially one of these future leaders. This is a national crew, right? Riverfield Studies kind of expands much of the US. So I'm going to give a quick synopsis of the Tuolumne River watershed, which is my home watershed in a sense. I've been playing in its mountainscape for many years. I was a backpacking guide and camp counselor up on the Tuolumne River for many summers, and I'm from San Francisco originally, which is the drinking water. We drink Tuolumne River water, but quickly, just an overview. The headwaters of the Tuolumne River are glacial sources up above Yosemite National Park, the Lyle and McClure glaciers specifically. And the river flows then downstream into the O'Shaughnessy Dam, which was completed in 1923, which is a big congressional act called the Raker Act, which San Francisco dammed Hetch Hetchy Valley, turning it into the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. After the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, there's about 85 miles of wild and scenic river, which we paddled most of in this expedition. Then then all the water sort of ends up in Dom Pedro, which is a big reservoir, holds about 2 million acre feet. So probably one of the premier sites you can kind of see here of graphics I use in my classes to show what bathtub rings are. Dom Pedro has definitely had a declining volume in the last 10, 20, 30 years, and it's the last sort of big holding tank for the Tuolumne River. And then we use that water to irrigate much of Modesto and Turlock counties. There's a lot of almonds and a lot of pistachios and big orchards in Modesto and Turlock. And also what you see here is what am I looking for? A dairy growing their own barley and alfalfa. And this is a field I actually did some research on, seeing if we could use these excess flows and flood the farmland. So the primary users then being Modesto and Turlock, or agriculture. And then last but not least, there's my cute dog Leo standing in front of the San Francisco cityscape, which is where I'm originally from. And that is what I would say most downstream user of Tuolumne River water. So not only is the Tuolumne River important up in the mountains, but it really is one of these watersheds that spans the cross section of California. And I would say many, many people are very reliant on the Tuolumne River water. Hence, when it's disturbed or potentially interrupted, there can be a lot of aftermath and negative effects. Specifically, I'm going to zone into the 2013 Rim Fire, which was a big fire in 2013 that started in Groveland, California. It was human caused. It was either a camper or a cigarette or something like that. And it burned about 250 acres, much of Stanislaus National Forest and Yosemite National Park. This is a cool NASA image where they actually saw the smoke plume and were able to identify the potential spread of it. It was a high severity fire, about 60% moderate to high, which is quite large. And although it was human caused, that wasn't just the one spark that caused it, but prolonged drought and fuel accumulation and fire suppression were definitely part of the sort of impact, or the reasons why the fire was so catastrophic. As you can see, the severity was quite intense, and specifically right along sort of these primary river channels, right? So the Tuolumne River and Cherry Creek, which is one of the other big tributaries in the Tuolumne River, and coming out of the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, we see the severity quite high, located near the water. And I'm not going to get much into the science of the impacts of water quality and of riparian vegetation and all of that, but I'm just going to tell you those have big impacts when there's high severity fires near important rivers. And this demonstrates that really nicely. I think you can see sort of where the burn scar on the left side, river left, and you can see sort of the difference in how the fire jumped and moved, and sort of the devastating impacts to vegetation and landscape on the river corridor. Here's another image sort of comparing a pre and post fire photo point, looking downstream on the river, and you can see this is at the confluence of the Clavey, which is another one of these important tributaries. You can see sort of downstream here, and sort of just the massive impacts on the riparian vegetation and also on the water and sediment supply also. Okay, that's context, which is too fun not to talk about. So now I'm going to talk about this jumble of words you see on the screen, which is taking all of this context and then putting it into education. And I would say putting it into action, because I do think of education as sort of a form of action. And let me break this down. As Jack sort of alluded to in his talk, the guy who funds a lot of this, Josh Veers, is definitely into acronyms. So CASA LA, right, got pinched down. This one we never quite fleshed out. I think it's Akwawawi. But what that stands for is twofold. So the first thing is the UC Water Academy, and the second is the Wildfire and Water Expedition. And I'm going to break those down specifically. So what we did was we put out a flyer and recruited for a cohort of the UC Water Academy, which is a wonderful, long-standing tradition, mostly started in the Center for Watershed Sciences at UC Davis. And I think I even see many folks on this call who have, if not taken part in the UC Water Academy, definitely know what it is or have been around it. And this was just this year's edition of the class. So what the UC Water Academy is is it's threefold. I'd say it's a professional network where we can build these lasting connections, not only with peers in water sciences, but with mentors and water professionals across the landscape of water in California. The second is really developing this water literacy. So really, what kind of information are we providing the students? How do we deepen our understanding of California water, and specifically on the data gaps and the potential dynamics and research gaps that are out there, so that we can build our students up to be more literate and then engage in that. And then lastly is communication and collaboration. So not only are we strengthening team science skills, but there's really a large, as Jack said, a large interdisciplinary focus working on just teamwork and people skills, which I think for academics is quite important sometimes. So we get out of our desks and into interdisciplinary settings. Okay, and then the second part of this word is WAWI, which is the Wildfire and Water Expedition. And what we did here was we also sort of a threefold mission was to take this interconnected system. So rather than just doing water every year, can we actually take another ecological discipline, which is wildfire ecology, and just there are so many different sort of sub-disciplines within wildfire and water, and really think of them together and bring experts together and just bring thinkers together on this discipline. Second is hands-on field learning. So Tuolumne River provides, as I said earlier, a living laboratory or a living classroom for us to look at this wildfire and water. And then third is this transdisciplinary collaboration. So like I said, with the goals of UC Water Academy, also the goals of wildfire and water is really uniting the hydrology folks, the ecology folks, policy, science communication. We had a mentor on this trip who's now Molly Stevens. She's now the head of the Sierra Nevada Research Institute, and she came on the trip, and her lesson to us all was about how to write grants about disturbance environments, and actually how as scientists are giving us really practical skills. So it wasn't just hardcore ecologists or hydrologists, but we had a nice mix of folks. She's also an ecologist herself, but beyond that. Okay. Then the learning design for this trip. So, and Jack talked about this sort of in the CASA LA, but we took a pretty similar approach, condensed it down into 7 days, and have kind of divided it into 3 categories here. I will say one thing that we could not have done is any of this without our project partners and without the site visit hosts, who often lend their time and energy for free, or most of the time. We're not, paying TID to give us an hour-long talk, or the SFPUC or the folks that work up at Hetch Hetchy, but they're really volunteering their time to help this happen. And the first step is immersion. So it's actually taking the 7 days with students and rafting the wild and scenic section was 3 or 4 days, and then visiting key sites that reveal how wildfire and water intersect. So we visited Yosemite National Park and met with the hydrologist up there. We toured the Moccasin Powerhouse, Hetch Hetchy Reservoir. We actually got to go in the dam for the first time in my life, which was really cool. They didn't let us take pictures because it's like a national security risk, but it was pretty cool being in a massive dam. We also talked to almond farmers down in the valley, right? So we tried to really span the watershed. So that's the immersive aspect. Here's a nice little cross section of our driving route. I will say there was one road closed on this expedition, and luckily, because I had guided trips so long in the area, I just said, okay, Josh, promise, let me just take this fire trail, and we ended up in the right place. So we took the vans through some I would say treacherous roads, but that was part of the immersive education. The second big theme of my learning design here was integration. So along the way, it was synthesizing the material. At the end of every day, it was coming together to talk about what we learned. How did wildfire and water intersect? Really just making it obvious, taking this integrative approach to getting the team to discuss, help identify key challenges post-fire sedimentation, hydropower reliability, water allocation trade-offs, right? We're taking all these big themes and really integrating them on the land and on the surface and thinking about how they play out specifically on this watershed. And then the third is application. So similarly, taking this field-based learning and then forming it into something, coming back after the trip and making an impact with the immersion and integration that they were able to experience on the trip. It's then what happens down the mountain, what happens off the river. There's one part of Jack's mentorship style that I always add, and we're putting this in the paper, but it's from circular mentorship to radial mentorship. So can we actually take those nodes that we've developed in this circle where we're all learning from each other and then all go back to it, right? Like thinking mathematically, like tangents, where the beam hits the circle and then actually like beams off in an opposite direction. So can we actually take what we've learned and then come back and apply it to our own locations? And the way I chose to do this was actually creating policy pitch projects. So I'll run through this quick. I know I'm running out of time. But we ended the course by then translating the experiences into action. So each of the students got into groups of 3 or 4 and created policy pitches, which were science informed and policy informed, grounded in their field observations and on some additional research they were able to do. They each wrote just 2-page policy briefs, so about the specific topics, and then also presented 15 minutes on Zoom, similar to this. Actually, be a nice recording to get my hands back on, but a policy pitch presentation to all of the mentors that were on the trip. In addition to, we invited the Turlock Irrigation folks, and we invited the Hetch Hetchy people, and we invited the Yosemite National Park, and they were all on the Zoom call, and it was really, really wonderful to see. And sort of, here's Aaron Hester, right? Not a student, but someone professing, or right, like then giving this information back to the university, or sorry, back to the students, and for us it would be then back to the communities. Some examples. So the students sort of self-selected into projects. They filled out a form after the trip, and I took everyone's ideas and put them. I was like, okay, I think you have similar ideas, and you have similar ideas, and you have similar ideas. This was one of the ones I was looking at, actually environmental. I'm glad Sarah's here. I never actually talked to her about this, but looking at environmental flows in the context of wildfires, and thinking about sort of, okay, how can we co-manage wildfire and water, and think about ecosystems, and how does that then translate into policy? So it was actually taking the students to zoom out from the scientific lens and say, I got to translate this to a senator or to a policymaker down the mountain. And so this was a really nice example, and these are available if anyone wants to look more in depth at them. I can email them too. This was another great example. Was one group of students really wanted to work on sort of how tribes and indigenous folks respond during times of fire, and what they actually ended up finding was that there was a Senate bill on the ballot in the Tuolumne area and throughout California that was looking on advancing tribal sovereignty for cultural burning practices and creating more access to cultural burning. So that group said, why do we have to reinvent the wheel? Instead, we're going to take what they're already doing, and they actually created a policy pitch that was science informed, backed by universities, and brought it to the senator's office and said, okay, here's actually, we're going to support this as our final project. And it was really cool. So we had a nice sort of array of presentations and projects. Overall, just sort of some major takeaways is like reflection and belonging. And James talked about this in ISRS, and I've been really inspired by this word of belonging. And these two quotes kind of bubbled up from the end, which is, I came to study water, but left loving a river, which I think is like probably one of the best things I've ever heard. And the second was just, between the rapids and the burn scars, like that was all like intense. But we as a group actually came together as a community, right? So taking the Riverfield studies and then adding the network and adding the collaboration to it. Let's go through a little quicker here, just sort of reminding us from our question. And because I love to answer my own questions, here's a couple of takeaways that I would, if I were to say, go ahead and design a course like this, I think ways in which we can reshape our watersheds and prepare future leaders is one, just this most simple thing. And this requires, Jack's I scream, you scream for stable funding, but it's taking them to the places where this change is happening. And so getting people into those landscapes. The second sort of, takeaway or advice I would have is training them to think across boundaries, is, taking two disciplines and shoving them together, or taking multiple mentors that don't necessarily work together and bringing them on the river together. And the third is empowering them to turn knowledge into action. Don't write me a scientific essay or manuscript, but let's think about how we can intersect with policy. All right, last 2 minutes here. I just wanted to highlight this book as sort of like a personal narrative, a personal, point of inspiration as I deal with teaching in disturbed landscapes is Terry Tempest Williams, one of my favorite kind of environmental writers. She has this line about moving forward and always forward through these struggles and intense disturbance and life changes and things in tandem with the landscape. So I definitely recommend this book. Yes, this is me. I have to shout it out again. We're doing an AGU session, and James is going to be talking. And I think I saw another person on here who might also be talking. John, I think, is also giving us talk. So come check out our AGU session. Andy is a co-sponsor. Lauren Parker is also on the call, and it will be a great place to talk to other folks sort of studying watershed science and Riverfield education. Yeah, this leads me to jumping in. This is probably me. I was probably Jack. This is funny because it's probably I'm that person jumping off the rock, I think, and you're on the other side in the boat. So couldn't be a better bridge. But yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you both, Jack and Kira. And so let's just open it up. We've got, about 8 minutes before the top of the hour. And so I'll leave this time is for all of you to ask questions. Don't be shy. I see some questions in the chat and I can share them. Were participants in the ELE encouraged to create and share any field logs or notes as part of the immersion?
Um, I don't think that any like field logs were necessarily asked of the students. But there was one of the slides in my presentation that actually showed Kira's notebook, and it had a little, hand-drawn map of the Colorado River Basin. So throughout the whole expedition, students were taking notes with different field leads and site visit hosts and from one another. And second question, did they bring to the expedition specific investigations that they were interested in? I think yes. I think each of the students had like a different kind of vetted interest in the Colorado River Basin. One that's coming to mind more specifically is we had a student that was looking a lot at water deliveries in New Mexico. And so I think that exploring the upper basin was a really nice kind of contrast or adding more depth to her study that she's doing for her master's project. So, um, yes, I think it was helpful, but I don't think any of it went specifically to any research.
Yeah, I just put in the chat. I think even just the fact that on day one you gave us each a notebook and a pen, at least forces people to think that they should be taking notes. So
Yeah.
that does help.
Mhm.
Other questions?
Everyone's ready to go trick or treating, I think.
So I have a question. I think, go ahead. No, Rachel, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if either or both of you could talk more about the mentorship models, especially the radial mentorship, which is one that I haven't really heard of before. And maybe if you could talk about how you set that up at the start of the trip or kind of implement that throughout.
Kira, maybe I'll talk about the setup and you go for the radial.
Sweet.
Cool. So as far as the setup, in a lot of these Zoom calls and really the early, like day one of meeting everybody in person, we kind of just tried to take a step back and get to meet one another, learn a little bit about, what each person would take into the field, what they would never leave without. And so that kind of helped to give everybody a little bit of insight into each other's expertises or areas of study. And then that was kind of like baseline. And then as we introduced more site visit hosts and introduced mentors into the trip, just those that like knowledge transfer kind of happened, not necessarily from experts to novices, for lack of a better term, but it all just kind of moved around. Yes, perfect. And then Kira, what do you have to say about the radial impacts?
Yeah, that's a new one, which is not like in the literature. This is we're gonna try and publish it in this JARA paper, where we decided sort of, and it's also kind of a call for funding because it's hard to tell funders, hey, just give me money to go take these 10 students and 4 mentors, but hey, instead, go give me money to go develop the next generation of water leaders who are all going to learn something on the river and then bring it back to our institutions. And so that's where I had this, like, at first I was calling it orbital. At one point we had gyroscope mentorship, where like these circles are all like floating around each other. But we ended up with radial impacts, just thinking of how we have the circular mentorship has sort of stayed in that bubble on the trip, whether it's from mentor to mentee, whether that's from professor to student, whether it's from Sarah Otterstrom was our mentor on one of these trips, so steward or practitioner to student, and then radial impacts is then bringing that and coming home and doing something with it, is then bringing it back to my university at UC Davis. There were students at Utah State, New Mexico State. We each get to go be like, the way I tried to explain it is like when you peel an orange and like little pieces fly out, it's like those little pieces all go back and like start a new orange grove or something like that. So really thinking of the lasting impacts, and then nesting that into funding calls, saying, I'm gonna pay X amount of money for students to go raft the Yampa River, but they're gonna come back. And this is happening. I'll give an example of radial impacts, which is two students and myself from this last trip are teaching a graduate student seminar next quarter on the Colorado River Compact negotiations. So that is like here's what we did and here's what we're coming back to our institution with.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, the idea of radial impacts. I've just like, for any of you who are part of the network already, you've seen my emails like, hey, I'm about to write the annual report, and and it's exactly those radial impacts that I'm asking for, because obviously there are the things that we know we did. We had the rendezvous, we did the training. I know who was there. I can assess them because they was there. They can tell me how it went. But there are all these things that are happening on the fringes, right? The things that spin off, the sparks that are flying into the night sky, that
That's
are
better. Yeah, the sparks.
But that I'm putting this call out like, hey, I don't know what you guys are doing. And then like John's like, well, actually I got a grant to take my students rafting on a river. I'm like, oh, well, that's pretty awesome, John. And Rachel's like 2 months out of it, she's already like started a certificate school up at like a river study. So those kinds of things, those unintended cascades, I definitely think about them as a network, but it's interesting to think about them as a class. Like what are those knock-on effects that you maybe don't even know are happening and how do you like, try to make as many sparks as possible, kind of knowing that you might not even know where they land. And in California, I think this is probably dangerous language to use, but
yeah, no, radial impacts. I don't know if that's the term. I like the cascade better than sparks or something like that. But
yeah, you guys
that's
over
great
here in the
idea.
East, sparks is fine, but you
Yeah,
guys,
no, don't even think about it.
yeah. Any last questions? We're at the top of the hour. If someone's got one, we can certainly entertain it. No inflammatory language. That's right.
I just had a comment, Kira. I was thinking of my attention was caught by the slide that was showing the types of the mentorship models, and one thing that, if I'm correct, maybe you can just verify this, but as it was being described, and you were talking about the rotating mentor approach as well as this sort of the circular part, and I was thinking of what you implied and was that the center of the circular mentorship model, who's sort of the expert, is that expert changes periodically so that you get a new cluster of people around that new person who rotates in, or at least their information's disseminated out. So I thought that was a cool visual way you guys were describing that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's exactly why interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary is important, because, I'm like a hydrogeologist STEM person. So like I could step up during the more like, let's talk about hydrology and climate change. But then when we like got to the like water rights part of it, like wasn't necessarily like, I kind of stepped back. So we sort of, had these different clusters and step in, step out approach, which I think is a really, positive part of this.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for sharing such great projects with us. I had some text from people who had to leave and said like, OMG, this was great. Such great program. So already wonderful feedback. You guys are doing really cool stuff. And I really appreciate you taking time to share it with us and letting us record you so, we can share it, far and wide, and we can be learning from the kinds of things that you were doing there on the West Coast and also spreading them around. So thanks very much to our guest speakers, Jack and Kira, and thank you all for joining us, and keep an eye out for our next seminar and are also for applications for the next year. It's good to see everybody. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you so much, James, for inviting us and hosting and everything.
Thanks,
Of
James.
course, of course.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, happy
Happy
Halloween.
Halloween, everyone.
Nice.
Awesome.